Good morning and welcome to another edition of One-on-One with Swope Health. I am your host, Eric Wesson. Thanks so much for joining us today, and my special guest is none other than Miss Melesa Johnson, and she is the Director of Public Safety for Mayor Quentin Lucas. Melesa, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Wesson. As I like to tell you and a lot of people that I grow up around, I vividly remember visiting the corner store with my grandmother every week for her to get her call paper. So it is very, very nice to be here with you this morning.
All right. So you grew up in Kansas City?
Yes, sir, I did. Born and raised.
Where'd you go to school?
So I went to elementary school in the Hickman Middle School District, so Truman Elementary and Irvin Middle School. But then I moved kind of back to the city with my mom and then went to high school at Bishop Miege High School and then went off to college at Columbia University in New York City and law school at Mizzou.
Okay. And how did you like leaving the nest, going to New York? Of all places to go to, New York.
It was an interesting experience for sure. It was awesome to have my kind of coming of age story, some of those formidable years in New York where I got to be just deeply immersed in so much culture. But I am definitely a Midwestern Kansas City girl at heart. So I couldn't wait to kind of get out of the Big Apple, take all of those lessons that I learned with me. But I always knew that I wanted to establish my adult life here in Kansas City at home.
Okay, so you went to law school, law degree. What did you do after you got your degree?
Quite a few things.
Okay.
So after I left law school, I started my legal career as a Jackson County prosecutor under the administration of Gene Peters Baker, where I learned so much, learned a lot of trial and practice experience, and just also the intricacies of public safety and the criminal justice system and sometimes the criminal injustice system. But it was during that time that I really developed my deep-seated passion for public safety and making sure Kansas City is a safe place for everybody, no matter your cultural background, socioeconomic status, etc. After leaving the prosecutor's office, I did go to the private sector at a law firm called Baker, Sterchi, Cowden, and Rice, where I practiced civil defense litigation. After leaving there, I did a judicial clerkship with the Honorable U.S. District Magistrate Judge Willie Epps Jr. for a year, and then I went to another law firm doing employment defense at Seyferth, Blumenthal, and Harris, and got to kind of study under the legal juggernaut that is Charlie Harris during that time. And then the mayor gave me a call, asked me if I wanted to come to his office to handle his public safety portfolio. And as I mentioned, I've always had a passion about making sure that we implement crime reduction strategies in a culturally responsible and sensible way. And so when he called, it was an offer that I could not refuse.
So how's it been, though, when you look at public safety in Kansas City from when you started, and we're going to talk about where we're at now? What are some of the thoughts that you have?
Absolutely. Well, first off, working in crime reduction and public safety is arguably one of the most difficult areas to work in. And you know this doing your reentry work. No matter what you do, no matter what you implement, there will be another homicide. There will be another non-fatal shooting. So what do you do with that? And I had to really step back and ask myself, do I genuinely think that we can change the violent crime problem in this city? And I genuinely believe that we can. Now, a couple of key evolutions that have come to fruition since I started in the mayor's office. I started there in February of 2021. There was a different police chief that did not get along with our prosecutor, that did not have the best relationship with City Hall. And we know when kind of the principals at the top are not in agreement, that energy seems to trickle down to their respective organizations and departments. And with that comes just a lot of turmoil, a lot of disagreement. And if you look at any other city that has kind of figured their crime problem out, and I love to use Tampa as an example, the chief of police, the prosecutor, and city leadership are all working in concert with each other to implement and find actual evidence-based strategies to reduce crime. In 2021, we did not have that as a reality. Fast forward to today, I am happy and glad to say that we do. And I have experienced the immense change in working relationships firsthand. We have a chief of police who actually goes to community events, who actually makes herself amenable and approachable approachable to different community organizations. She's participating in a 3rd District forum on February 27th, which was something that was unheard of for prior leadership at the department. She, and by she I mean Chief Stacey Graves, is open to engaging more civilians and social service organizations in the actual crime fighting plan of KCPD, and information sharing that comes along with that, actually handing over names, addresses, phone numbers of victims and witnesses so that we can wrap around those individuals with necessary social services. And so she has been a huge change. Also, the department's working relationship with the prosecutor's office. Until we get clearance rates up and until we are able to actually prosecute and convict more criminals, there's not going to be a deterrent in the community. Hey, don't commit crime, because you will ultimately pay for it and you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. For a long time, that just was not the reality. I mean, I think our clearance rates for KCPD trended right around 50%. Of course, it depends on who you ask.
Right.
If it's as close to 50% or not. But now, for example, right before the end of the year, our police department, our violence crimes division, collaborated with our prosecutor's office and were able to clear 10 cases that were not cleared prior to right at the end of the year, through collaboration, through opening back up the case files, figuring out what additional police work was needed, and therefore 10 more people will be brought to justice. And I think that that is huge, because that is not something that we experienced not long ago. And then, at least from a city perspective, for the longest we would have people ask us, and people from the philanthropic community and private community, how can I help? How can I, dedicate my dollars to reducing crime? For the long time, the only answer we had was give it to the police foundation or give it to the police department.
Right.
Which we know we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We've been giving the police department more and more money every single year, and we still see our homicide and violent crime numbers increase. And so now we actually have an answer. We have a couple of answers. There is an organization called KC 360, which is a strategy that has been taken from Omaha, Nebraska, and now it is being implemented here. That is more for kind of like the private philanthropic prevention efforts. How do we prevent people from getting under the guise of law enforcement at all? So after school programming, shrinking the socioeconomic gaps in certain areas of our city, things of that nature. Whereas from our perspective, the city, we now have this program called Partners for Peace, and it is a pure crime intervention program that operates directly off of KCPD intel, which is going back to the increased information sharing that we've been experiencing over the past couple of months. And we get information on every non-fatal and fatal shooting that happened the week prior, and we use that information to reach those individuals and next of kin to really kind of ascertain their needs and work with over 26 social service providers to get them the help, everything that from food assistance, rent and utility assistance, housing, transitional housing, substance abuse treatment, pretty much anything they need to stop and prevent the likelihood that they too will lead a life of crime.
So you brought up an interesting point when you talked about the connection between the chief of police and the prosecutor's office and city hall officials, but you left out one other key point of that, and that's the community. Because who helps you solve crimes? The community.
Absolutely.
And that disconnect there, I think that played a key part in the police department's inability to solve a lot of crimes, because there was no relationship between the police and the community.
Absolutely.
It was more adversarial than it was, okay, so let's try to get along.
Absolutely. I mean, an annual ham and turkey giveaway just is not going to cut it.
Exactly.
For police community relations. And I completely agree with you, Mr. Wesson. Arguably, the community is the most important and the most important piece, because even from a strategy and social services perspective, no model or no plan will work unless the community feels like they have a valid and important part at the table. So when you have a chief that is coming to community meetings, that is coming to urban summit meetings, where it is probably not the most welcoming forum for her, but she's subjecting herself to listening and hearing what the community needs, and therefore she is able to respond and act based off of those interactions, which I think is a great and welcomed change from the past.
And not go to community meetings and blame crime on the people in the community.
Precisely.
Rather than that. Because I had been to a couple of those meetings out south with Rick Smith, and it was always the community's fault. Mm-hmm. Not his law officer's fault. But anyway,
exactly.
we wish him well in retirement and whatever he's doing. So the Partners for Peace connects people to resources.
Absolutely.
How's that working?
It is working. It is working. We started this initiative in August of 2022, so it hasn't even been a year yet. We have already made 196 referrals based off of the information that we get from KCPD. And, you know, it has been somewhat of an exercise in flying a plane while you build it. We knew that we just no longer had the luxury to sit around and just continue to be a think tank and kind of develop a plan. We needed to act. And of course, with acting, we've had to change course a number of times. We've had to pivot a number of times. But I am happy about where we are right now. We pretty much have a full working infrastructure that automatically gets in touch with every victim of a non-fatal shooting and every family of a homicide victim. But I also know at the start of 2023, we have to shift some of our focus to other demographics in order to reach them with social services as well. We will continue to do the work that we're doing with the families and the victims of non-fatal shootings. But in order to see substantial decreases in our violent crime numbers, we have to get to the actual crime drivers. And we have a couple of ideas on how we're going to do that are already in motion. First, resuming our Department of Corrections visits. We have a client advocate on staff at the health department at the city. Her name is Heidi Jones, and she is a powerhouse. Her and a detective by the name of Von Burns. Yes, sir. I'm sure you're very familiar.
I know Von Burns.
Yes. They get a report of every individual that is being released from the Department of Corrections within 6 months, and also has a address listed as their parole address in the city of Kansas City. Mm-hmm. So they are meeting with these individuals before they even walk out of the prison doors, ensuring that they have a clear plan for success. Mm-hmm. And connecting those individuals to social services. I think about 70%, give or take, of homicide victims and defendants are on supervision. So what does it look like if we get to those folks before they even get a chance to kind of be immersed in the environment that caused them to be there in the first place, and make sure that they have a plan for success? So that is idea number one that is already in the works. Number two is working with our gang intelligence unit to develop a network of individuals that are closely aligned to ongoing crime. Now, if you remember 2014, the height of Nova. Now, Nova had a lot of community issues. It definitely did. The very aggressive nature of the call-ins, kind of the threatening tone of a lot of the interactions and touches. But what was beneficial and what did work in Nova, and this is 2014, the last time our homicides were under 100, is the identification of the network, using gang intelligence, looking at different tattoos, evaluating social media, who hangs with who. A police officer pulling somebody over, and the driver is actually a suspect of a crime. Well, who was in the passenger seat? Let's make sure we don't lose sight of that individual, not to enforce, not to charge on them, not to place charges on them, but to help them. Mm-hmm. And so working with our gang intelligence unit to once again develop that network, not do the next step of Nova that had the threatening call-ins, but doing one-on-one outreach, custom notifications to those individuals that have been identified, and making sure that we have the tools for them to change their lives, because we can't keep demanding people change their lives without giving them the tools to do so. Mm-hmm. So that is where the Partners for Peace focus is at the top of 2023. And we've made a lot of strides in those regards thus far.
And in doing so, having those alternatives makes them feel more engaged. And I've talked to Von several times about what they're doing. Actually, he's asked me, hey, why don't you come up there with us one time to do it? And I've been really seriously thinking about it, because my reentry program connects people to resources as well. And So I think that's a great concept, and that's a great place to start.
Absolutely. And to that point, Mr. Wesson, I will encourage you to take Detective Burns up on that offer, because doing this work and being like deeply ingrained in this work, because there have been numerous times where I've gone to homes of homicide victims myself, where I've gone to meet victims of non-fatal shootings myself. One constant theme is that the mouthpiece of the person delivering the message matters more than we know. Yeah. No matter if a brother or a black man or a sister is wearing a badge, sometimes people that we are trying to reach just cannot internalize and receive that message because of their close connection to the police department. We know the deep-seated community distrust that we have to overcome. But when a Mr. Wesson walks in,
it doesn't make any difference.
No, it makes a huge difference when a Mr. Wesson walks in and they've heard your name because grandmama also reads the call paper every week, right? And you can speak their language. You know who a sleazy world go is, whereas a lot of other people do not. One thing that we're going to have to do as a city, and honestly nationwide as a community, is how do we get more people with lived experience doing this work? How do we get more people that can actually deliver a message in a way that resonates with a section of our population that is often deemed unreachable? How do we get more people in these positions doing this work full time in order to really drive those messages home? And so that's another priority of ours, is making sure that we have more people with lived experiences doing this work.
And so here in the next couple of weeks, maybe there's going to be $30 million spent over the next six years, isn't it?
Correct.
For crime prevention programs. What are your thoughts on that?
I am elated. I am so excited for a number of reasons. If you look at the past city's budget and how we've kind of historically funded violence prevention and intervention, we rely on a federal grant every 3 to 5 years. It's not really built in and institutionalized in our annual budgeting process, right? At the municipal level. Sure, combat we appreciate. Federal grant opportunities we appreciate. But we have not done the best job of investing in violence prevention at the municipal level. With this historic landmark piece of legislation, we will do so. And we will no longer have to review our budget and cherry pick different line items to message to the community how much we are spending on violence prevention and intervention. Now we will have just a one-stop shop, a pot of money, $30 million, $6 million every year for the next 5 years, dedicated to getting that funds in those funds into the hands of organizations that have been doing this work for years. And, you know, we have to fund these initiatives if we're going to talk about violent crime as one of our priorities, and if not our city's biggest issue. We have to make sure our budgeting aligns with that statement. And I am just very honored to play a small part in trying to get this across the finish line.
Okay. And that's great, and it sounds good, but I went to the hearing, and I don't want to say this offensively, but it was the same people there with the same conversations. And my thought is, okay, doing the same thing the same way and expecting different results has never worked. So how do we implement new ideas in order to get to our achieved goals?
There's a number of ideas that we have at play to prevent exactly what you're talking about, because I completely hear you.
And you can't just throw money at a problem.
Exactly.
I think that's going to solve the problem.
Exactly. So a couple of ideas on that I am collaborating with Councilwoman Raina Park-Shaw on. Similar to combat that is housed at Jackson County, and they have a combat commission that reviews all of the applications for funding and makes recommendations to the Jackson County legislature. What if we use the health commission as our reviewing kind of body, because violent crime is a public health crisis, and on the health commission there are a number of community leaders that don't really have any political interest or stake in this game. They just want to see the money get into the hands of evidence-based programs and organizations. Also, you have our health director, Dr. Melesa Johnson, who has literally dedicated her academic life and her professional life to violence reduction, holistic violence reduction strategies. So we have different people at at play making these recommendations that will ultimately come to council, people that arguably have a closer nexus and communication to the community that we're trying to help. Also, instituting a rule or safeguard that if you receive more than 10% of your funding from combat, you unfortunately fall to the bottom of this priority list. Trying to open up a gateway to funding for more organizations that have not systemically or traditionally received city dollars or Jackson County dollars. And also having a very clear requirement for evidence-based proof that your program or initiative works. And it doesn't have to be, your own kind of data, because we know a lot of these organizations are just getting started. But is your model based off of a model that has worked elsewhere in the country? What are you basing your model on? Is it based on DOJ best practice standards? Is it based on the cure violence model associated with intervention that Aim for Peace is based off of? What is your kind of pedagogy? What is your foundation to make sure that we can evaluate that and then make the decision on funding? So I definitely hear you loud and clear. There are mechanisms at play to try to prevent some of the duplication that we have seen year after year. But I will kind of counter you, Mr. Wesson, in that there are a lot of organizations that were up there kind of the same old, but they do good work. For example, Center for Conflict Resolution. They have been a community pillar for so long in the area of conflict resolution that often goes overlooked. If you look at every monthly Board of Police Commissioner report, the number one reason for a homicide is an argument. And a lot of different programs kind of involve conflict resolution, but they are really organizations dedicated specifically on conflict resolution. So we're definitely trying to open the doors for more organizations to have access to these funds. But I think that there are a lot of institutions and individuals and organizations that have received funding that should continue because they do good work.
I'm going to disagree with you. You're watching One-on-One with Swope Health. I'm your host, Eric Wesson. I'm with Melesa Johnson. She is the safety director for the city of Kansas City.
Yes, sir.
Here's my issue with conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Conflict resolution, as we see it and know it, is a Band-Aid. And let me kind of explain here for a minute. I might have an issue with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you all come in and resolve that particular conflict. My conflict with you is a symptom of another problem.
Mm-hmm.
You just the face of it right now. So when I see these conflict resolutions and I hear the approach that they take, it deals with me and your conflict, but I just replaced that with Stacy, because I haven't gotten to the root cause of what my real problem is. And my real problem might not be you. My real problem is that I don't have you guys told me about an American dream, but you didn't tell me I had to have an education to get there. So now I'm frustrated and upset because I thought all I had to do was do A, B, and C, and D was going to happen. So I don't think that conflict resolution, from my experience, and I can only speak with mine, digs deep enough into what the real issue might be. And so what I see a lot of times is the conflict moves from you. Okay, we get our issue resolved. Now I go over here to somebody else and I got a conflict with them. Then I see somebody in a grocery store, I got a conflict with them because I never dealt with what the real issue is within myself. And I think that's my problem I have with it. It sounds good, it looks good on paper. We can intellectualize crime and problems better than any other people on the planet.
Absolutely.
And like you said, you have to have people there that have lived experiences. And I'm not talking about people that, got some traffic tickets, but it has to be done with people that, have been there, done that, and have been able to be successful. That's just my rant.
I completely agree. But, with that, I think two things can be true at the same time, right? We have to continue to hammer at the root causes of crime, workforce development, livable wage jobs, eradicating food deserts, making sure that our schools are up to par. But with that, and the community that a lot of people that find themselves under kind of a umbrella of crime, they grow up in environments, and by they I mean myself included, we grow up in environments where violence is the primary way you resolve a conflict, whether that's your parents arguing or your uncles getting into a fist fight at the family barbecue, right? And so when that is ingrained in you for your entire life, we cannot be surprised that when you grow up and you live in a state like Missouri that has unfettered access to a firearm, you pair that with your inability to separate violent crime from resolving this very immediate conflict, and then boom, perfect recipe for a homicide.
And in our culture, what is it? You come in the house, you got a bloody nose because you got into it with your neighbor's kids. You better get back out there and fight.
Or did you win? I'm not asking you, are you okay? Are you whole? Well, how can I help you? It's did you win?
Yeah. And you better go back out there and win.
Exactly.
Don't come back in here no more unless you won that fight. And so that's what that's embedded in our culture and in our value system. And one other thing, and I read a lot of Iana Van Zandt books, and she said something in a book called The Spirit of a Man that is so true. With black boys, you get a whooping, it hurts, you cry. What's the first thing your parents tell you? Shut up that noise. Stuff that pain. So now we're walking around as black men stuffing pain until we get to the point where we can't keep a kettle on it anymore and it just blows up. Unfortunately, it blows up in a lot of cases in violent ways.
Exactly. And you raise a really good point, which is something that I want us as a community to start focusing on and having these conversations out loud is, the root causes of crime are what they are. And we know how we got here, right? And it's definitely not at the exclusive fault of our own at all. And we're not inherently more violent individuals just because of the color of our skin.
Absolutely.
It's the circumstances that have been placed upon us.
Absolutely.
But how do we start conversations about the cultural and value norms that need to change in our own house? Because I applaud and am a fan of our new chief of police, but she can't have those conversations with our community. The city manager can't have those conversations with our community. Arguably, a lot of times,
really can't have.
I was just about to say that. No, I was just about to say that. And I think that he is aware and knowledgeable of some of the disconnects that he has with certain demographics of our community. He knows that. So how do we, as people that come from and still live in these parts of the city, how do we really start these conversations about you are only doing what slave owners and colonialists want you to do, taking your fellow brother out, removing him, eradicating his existence. You matter. The person that you are thinking about killing matters, and you are all valuable brothers, sons, fathers, nephews. How do we really start those conversations in a culturally responsible way? And I know this is your podcast, but I'm asking you a question.
And you know what? It's 30 minutes already. Oh my goodness. You're going to have to come back and we're going to have to do round 2.
I would love that.
When we have some updates on Partners for Peace, maybe in a couple of months, come back, give us an update, and we can delve down deeper into the cultural issues that we have that we don't want to talk about.
We have to.
We don't even want to talk about the impact that crack cocaine had on our community and our value system. We that was then, this is now. Sweeping under the rug.
Exactly. And everything with our community is a catch-22, right? Because with the crack epidemic, a lot of people of color that never saw real money in their lives saw money. And then the first black politicians that got into office, who do we think were funding their campaigns? The numbers man, the crack dealer. You know what I mean? But with that, a lot of turmoil and community damage and disruption that we are still dealing with to this day. And so these are the conversations, though, that we have to start having, because a black person will kill more black people than a police officer ever will. So until we start to look inward, we gotta start doing it. And I think you would be a great mouthpiece to start those conversations with.
Melesa Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. Please, my email is an open avenue to getting in touch with me. That is Melesa, Melesa.Johnson, John, at kcmo.org. Please send me a message and I would love to speak with you.
All right. As always, I've got the greatest listening audience in the world. Till next week, remember, tough times don't last. Tough people do. Until next week, peace.